Welcome to Fuck, Marry, Kill, the podcast from Sister Song Women of Color Reproductive Justice Collective, where we normally talk about how everything is reproductive justice. But today, we're actually talking about something that is absolutely not reproductive justice, and that's the connection between white supremacy and the anti-abortion movement. Today, I am joined by Negar Esfandiari from Repro Action to talk about how these two topics that may feel unrelated are actually intimately related. Thank you for being here, Negar.
Thank you. I'm so excited to be here.
So have you played Fuck, Marry, Kill before?
I have.
You're ready to go. Okay.
I'm ready.
Okay, even though we're playing with not people, we're playing with concepts, so...
Okay.
Fuck, Marry, Kill, Elon Musk allegedly doing the Nazi salute. When anti-choice people have those, those big signs they have with, aborted fetuses, but it's like an 8-year-old, it's, crazy, where they're like, this is what your fetus looks like at conception. Yep. One of those. And the Dobbs decision to remove Roe v. Wade from federal law.
Ooh, this is hard. Okay. Okay. I think I would fuck the Dobbs decision.
Hot take.
Marry the fetuses, billboards, and kill Elon Musk, Nazi salute.
I need to know what your brain did to get there.
Okay, so let me explain. So I feel like with the stuff that I look at every day for work, obviously the content is still upsetting. It's fucked up. But in order to do the work that I do, I think I try to kind of view it strategically, just as a detachment for self-preservation in a way. And I think also a lot of anti-abortion activists and personalities refer to Dobbs as something that isn't enough, and it's a start, but we have so much more work to do, and so maybe my decision was leaning in a little bit to that dissatisfaction. And the fetuses, I think I just really wanted to kill Elon Musk, honestly.
That's fair. Everything else worked around that. Totally. So do you want to start by introducing yourself and telling us a little bit about the work that you do?
Yes. So my name is Negar Esfandiari. I use she or they pronouns, and I am the Senior Tactical Research Manager for Repro Action. So my job is a lot of behind the scenes research work, and basically kind of trying to learn what the trends and customs are that are going on with the anti-abortion movement as it relates to the current government, the past government, and what we envision the future will be for them.
Beautiful. So from your research, let's start with a little bit of a history lesson. Where did the anti-choice movement begin, and why did it begin? And then what was going on in the country when it comes to race at that moment?
Yeah, so I think it's hard to say when exactly the first anti-abortion, activist was born. But I think as it relates to white supremacy, a lot of the, tenets of white supremacy, like ableism and sexism, basically putting the white, able-bodied, straight man on a pedestal. Reproductive justice doesn't mesh with that.
Yeah, doesn't.
So I think, and also there's a lot of virtue signaling involved in anti-abortion movements that is based on white supremacy. So I think that eugenics and ableism, for example, go hand in hand, and these two ideologies are aimed to reduce abnormalities and bar those who are unfit from being parents, from having families, or it's used as a rationale for sterilizing people involuntarily. And one of the things that I've been looking into a lot over the past few months is how they appropriate rhetoric and use that from actual liberation movements and narratives to fit their own agenda. And so all of these things, like, let's say, like Loving versus Virginia, there's a case called Buck versus Bell where there was involuntary sterilization involved because of disability. There's so many like that too, and I think it's in all of those timelines that we see how prevalent white supremacy is in affecting and creating or upholding even institutions that allow anti-abortion activists and lawmakers to overtake power, you know?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's very true that, like, when we look back at the history of these different cases that have come true, like, they're not just related to race, they're related to all kinds of other issues of power and control, which comes with ableism, which comes with sexism. Like, all of these kind of fall under the same umbrella of being able to decide who has the right to live or die, who has the right to reproduce. And so when the anti-choice movement and the white supremacy movement are working hand in hand to decide who has the right to do what they want with their bodies.
Yeah, definitely. I think the words now that we have to describe these trends that have been happening, like you were saying, ableism, xenophobia, miscegenation, all of these have a hand in, like you were saying, who deciding who has a right to live or die, and why that plays into this idea of creating the right family, and the nuclear model of the family that's based on a standard that is colonialist, honestly. So it's not adaptable to any type of liberation framework. And even though that's true, anti-abortion activists, I think, latch on to this family ideology of trying to seem very domestic and warm-hearted in a way, when it really is actually about all of the things that we were talking about, where ableism and using people's differences against them, basically.
It feels almost counterintuitive to me, where it's like, okay, you're saying that you want to make, like, these nuclear families, and you want like to decide who gets to have children, but then you don't want abortion, which would stop certain people, or people broadly. It would allow people to end pregnancies. Like, I don't really understand how those two things work together. Like, I guess it always comes back to control, but how do those things even make sense in somebody's mind? Like, I feel like they feel like opposites to me.
Yeah, it is definitely a mindfuck. I think what the thing that you really have to do as somebody who looks at this stuff every day, it's hard sometimes, or not hard, but I'll say you read over and over again things that may seem like they're backed up by a study, or, they'll claim that it's science. And to people who aren't us and don't have a way of discerning whether or not that's actually trustworthy, it seems like they're talking about something that has been tested and true. And then when you go and look at the sources that they've cited, it's like, studies that have been retracted, or things that are surveys that have only been based on a really small pool of people or a targeted group of people to basically get the results that they want. So this information funneling is very strategically framed for them to push out this narrative that this is how the family should be. And obviously there are varying narratives to different anti-abortion groups and activists. Some are completely on the train of, like, no IVF, no abortion, no nothing. Others are trying to kind of play in the middle, so protecting IVF legislation, quote unquote, but still opposing abortion. And then, as we've seen, I think, a lot in the last year, there's so much kind of infighting over a lack of consensus over what the ultimate abortion restrictions should be. So people saying that a 6-week ban is not enough, or people saying that we should settle for a 15-week ban, and so many different players from, I guess, extreme or more extreme or less extreme places in the anti-abortion movement trying to influence politics and narrative.
Yeah. What do you see as like the ideological difference between the 15-week people and the ban it all people? Like, are they essentially the same and just have a different, like is it a political tactic, or is there a fundamental ideological shift between those two?
I think there is kind of a shift because some of the people who are, I guess, more in the middle or moderate, they seem to think very incrementally. So even if, let's say, they believe and have said that they want a total abortion ban, in order to appeal to the masses a little bit more, and I guess for a lack of better way of describing, make their demands more palatable to, the quote-unquote average person, they'll ease into things that don't seem as extreme, and then they'll use the rationale that this is how they get in the door, and this is how they kind of start the conversation, and the way that they win is that they incrementally go through all of these people's minds and basically have a sense of power influencing them on a small scale, which hopefully to them leads to world domination.
Right.
So I think there are some people who are really not willing to compromise on their values and will be straight up about that. And there are others in the movement who are kind of this more incrementalist mentality of chipping away at anti-abortion frameworks rather than going all out. Like, we will only go for this and this is all we'll go for. We're not going to support anyone that doesn't support what we want.
Right, which I feel like is something that the left struggles with too sometimes, right? Like, it's like the people who believe in these little incremental reforms, these people who believe that there are some things that are non-negotiables, and like both are, I don't know, I feel like I stand on different stances depending on the topic, and so like both are useful, but I mean, none of it is useful when it comes to them. They should all stop.
Yeah, they should just fully stop.
They should just stop. If you could stop, that would be super awesome.
Yeah.
And it's wild how, I mean, the racialized tactics of the anti-abortion movement, like I know that when I was young, I used to volunteer as a clinic escort, and I would take all my siblings and we would go to the Planned Parenthood and we would support. It was really cute, a cute family bonding thing. And then there was a bunch of protesters who would come, of course, and throw Bibles through the windows. And,
oh my God.
Yeah, they were really intense. I grew up in rural Pennsylvania, and they would throw Bibles through the windows. They would like come and bring their children, who would scream like, "Mommy, please don't kill me," at the people coming in, which is so traumatizing for any. I mean, I saw people turn around, like, and who knows if they were even going in for abortions. Maybe I was going in for a regular doctor's appointment.
Been an annual exam.
Right, it could have been an annual exam, but they turned around and walked out, and they called the the abortion doctor the butcher, which I really fuck with that villain name, but it's pretty wild. And something that would always happen was that I remember people come up to me, like adults, and I was a child, and they would come up to us and say, it's your people that they're killing in there, right?
Yeah.
To try and put it on this rate, and they try to take something that they know is going to hurt, like they know that we care about this, they know that we care about racial equity, and they say, okay, here's a way for us to make that a reality.
Yeah, it's really, the population control mentality is so ingrained, and they'll use that to their advantage in so many situations like that, or in policy even, to appeal to different groups, because they know that their most popular, or I guess biggest fan base, if you will, is white, able-bodied men and women who are in monogamous marriages, have the same values of there are two genders, only marriage between a man and a woman. So I think they're trying to employ tactics that will bring in conservative people of color or other marginalized identities based on these little things that they think will give them a sense of like looking good in a way. It's kind of like they're trying to do DEI but not.
Yeah. In the worst way possible. Yeah. They're trying to pick something that they think you're going to care about.
Yeah.
Does it work in your work? Have you found that it's effective?
I think yes and no. I think there definitely are people in the anti-abortion movement who are part of other marginalized groups, whether it's race or like there are quote unquote progressive anti-abortion activists. So they do exist, but I think at a certain point, the lack of consensus is kind of what gets in the way of all of these different groups working together to have a common goal, because there are so many different goals. And I think one thing that we definitely saw in up to the election is so many different groups and individuals and media personalities talking about, oh, Trump needs to do this and he needs to institute this rule, or he shouldn't do that because it's going to drive people away, and then like we're not going to have as many people on our side for when we need it. So I think they think really strategically about it, and it's about benefiting them and their ideology. It's not about actually welcoming people into the movement.
Right. The movement. The movement derogatory.
Literally the movement derogatory.
But yeah, totally. That makes sense. That it's not actually about it's a political play. It's a tactic. It's something that is intended to give them more political power and not to actually have a ideological basis to it. When you think about the connection between the anti-abortion movement and white supremacy, like how would you, to somebody who's never heard this before, how would you talk to them about it? How would you make that connection?
I think a lot of it is related to what we were talking about with the history, and just having roots in something that is exclusionist, I mean, in the most mild term possible, probably, and trying to weed out, literally, the people that they don't want in power. So they can exist in society, but they only exist to serve them. It's not that they have an equal standing. And they're not willing to confront the existing problems that we have that are affected by their viewpoints, like how different government agencies disproportionately incarcerate Black people and brown people, or how government assistance programs are very discriminatory towards people who have had any type of substance abuse problems. So these are just ways that they see they can kind of hail power over everyone in the vicinity, rather than say, hey, like, we have these great values and we think you should be a part of it. Although they definitely also do that.
Right. And so, it works, and it does work.
It does work. Yeah, it does work. I mean, there are so many things that if a person agrees with one part of their ideology, or it could be anti-abortion movement broadly, or it could be Republicans, like there's maybe one thing in a platform for a candidate that speaks to that person, and that's their issue, and they will vote that way. So sometimes it's not they fully believe in this agenda and want, abortion to be illegal and all of this, but maybe it's like people using small businesses or like taxes as ways of saying, well, this candidate is going to protect me more than the other on that.
Right.
So it's very nitty-gritty complicated.
Yeah, like grocery prices become more of the issue. And I've heard it a lot from people who organize on the left, that this idea that like the right is very effective at inviting people in, even if all they care about is one of the topics. Like all you have to care about is one thing that it's on the right platform, and then you're in. Versus the left, we do struggle with trying, like, do you have to care about everything that we care about? Right. Do you have to believe in the whole platform in order to be let into the quote-unquote movement.
Yeah, exactly. I think one thing that they're very effective at doing is exactly that, and latching on to something that they view as exploitable in a person, and then bringing them on in hopes, I think, that they will adapt more to that agenda and mindset. So it's less so, can you prove to us that you're worthy of being here, and will you follow us in our mission, and will you contribute to our goals, you know, even if there are things that they might not agree with. And obviously there's a scale, right? So it's ranging from people who will try to bring everybody in, and then others who are maybe more selective, or will be more outspoken about who should follow them, you know?
Yeah. Have you watched Big Mouth?
I have not.
Okay,
Should I?
You should. Okay. But there's this episode where Andrew goes to he like gets involved in the incel community online accidentally. He's like 13 and he's like just got broken up with for the first time, and he's like, oh my god, women, you know, girl, what do they want? Like he's like having that first crisis, and some incel reaches out to him and is like, dude, we see you. You should come to one of our meetings. And then he gets there, and at first he's like, yeah, and then halfway through they're like, and that's why we need a all-white nation state. And he's like, wait
a second. No.
And it really and he leaves, thank God, shout out Nick Kroll and the creators of the show. But like in another world, that could have been an in for that local incel child. That could have been their in to white supremacy. Like all it takes is like they exploiting a child going through a breakup can be enough in order to bring them into like what is a really, really actually dangerous mindset, but that has so many entry points that are easy to get attached to.
Yeah, and we see that a lot in terms of age and anti-abortion media personalities and organization leaders specifically trying to appeal to the youth and younger people. Younger voters want this, and we did a study that proves this. And obviously there are people in those organization spaces who are young and agree with the way that they do their work, but it's very predatory in a way that even those people, the young people that they employ or that volunteer for them, they're there to serve them. It's not like, here's an opportunity for you to grow in your activism or your career. Like, this is what you can do to serve us and our goals, and if you do that, then great for you. You can advance in our organization. And obviously, you know, the younger you are, the more impressionable you are, and if this is something that you've grown up with around you, it's hard to break out of that mindset, and they definitely latch onto that and kind of snowball it into something of like, well, you know, when you were growing up, did you feel like your mom was supposed to be doing the same thing as your dad? Or like these personal experiences that can be specific or not. Maybe they know something about a specific person or a group that they can kind of exploit, whether it's like parental trauma or if they've had an abortion specifically, and using all of that information to have as like ammunition, basically, to bring these young people in who don't know better. And I think sometimes it's not the end for them, like they break out of that cycle. But for the most part, I think, especially with the last year politically, there's so many younger people flooding to these movements because it's successful. They see it as a successful way to participate.
Right. It's so interesting because I feel like I've heard people say things like, oh, you know, we just gotta wait till the older people die off and then we won't have these problems anymore. And I'm kind of like, this has been proven not true.
Yeah. Like, I mean, it's like, I guess, like, good for them. Maybe they'll retire and go to Florida or something.
Right, as they do.
But it's definitely not going to eliminate the problem.
Right.
Because who are they mentoring and teaching? You know, like, those, it's not completely separated. And I think when younger conservatives look to who's in power, like, who is that? You know, it's lawmakers that share viewpoints with them, no matter how old or young they are. And I think also there's this seniority type mentality of, oh, this person has been around for many years in the movement, we should listen to them, and they know better because they've fought so many more battles than us. So it is kind of using, again, like the liberation framework of trying to respect your elders, but basically just serve another agenda, you know?
Totally. So when you think about who gets disproportionately impacted by abortion bans, who are those people, and how does that align with what you're talking about with this white supremacy being connected to anti-abortion movement?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think, I mean, as we were saying, like, especially in terms of government assistance programs or like government kind of discrimination in the sense of opportunity, Black and brown people are very much the most effective, like in terms of the maternal mortality rate, depending on where you are in the country, whether that affects your access to care. And I think also it kind of preys on this perception that the South is this abortion desert and there are no progressive people there and everybody is white and wants to preserve the ideas of white supremacy and ableism and just make it, you know, another Mount Rushmore, basically. And that's just not true. Like, there are so many grassroots groups in the South that have pushed forward so many movements historically, and the frustrating thing is that people don't see that, you know.
Yeah.
They don't acknowledge that it exists. Actually, I think I learned a lot about that from one of the continuing education series.
Oh, yay!
Yeah. So that was really awesome because I was like, yeah, I think growing up, you know, I'm from California,
Right.
so it's a little bit more sheltered in that way. And I was like, well, yeah, the South sucks. Like,
Yeah.
you know, there's no one there who cares about people like me or whatever. And it's like, actually, that's where the center of a lot of impactful and historic organizing has happened. And I think antis definitely latch onto things like that too, like appropriating the framework of like civil rights or like anti-slavery, Black Lives Matter, using all of this language and imagery to co-opt justice framework and attach themselves to successful movements that other people, you know, progressives or people on the left view as important and valuable. So they want people to think that they have kind of the same moral compass and their work is actually going to benefit society in the same way that the abolitionist movement benefited society from abolishing slavery, or civil rights framework of everybody is viewed equal, and how that
They think they're that?
Yeah, they think, well, one of the most prevalent things right now is they love using the 14th Amendment to claim that everybody is viewed as equal, and to them that means fetal personhood.
Oh, I see the connection.
Yeah, so they'll sometimes, well, actually a lot of time, they actually love doing this. They'll claim that Roe versus Wade was the same as Dred Scott versus Sanford. So, yes.
Steamy hot take.
Yeah, hot take, because they think that Roe versus Wade, whenever, you know, now in many years, somehow, is going to be viewed as negatively as the Dred Scott decision was, or is.
Can you give
now?
Can you give a quick little like overview of what that means?
Yes. So, as many of us know, Roe versus Wade is protecting abortion constitutionally or nationally, and the Dred Scott decision was basically kind of a cornerstone in whether or not people believed in slavery, enslaving Black people. So now when we think about that, it's very, to us, obviously, yeah, that is bad.
Right.
And I think even if people maybe don't agree with that on the right, they'll make it seem like, oh, we condemn these issues and we just don't want to see the same trend happen again with, you know, poor babies who can't advocate for themselves. So they will literally compare fetuses to real, actual enslaved people who they think had their rights taken away the same way that a fetus has its rights taken away. Yeah. The appropriation of slavery rhetoric is so prevalent, and it happens very often. So it's kind of ingrained now in their movement. So yeah, it's
so fascinating because I'm just so far removed from that I don't know that. And so how do you, this is so much of what you do is keeping track of what they're up to. Like, how do you live with that? Like, what do you do? What do you do at the end of the day?
You have to do something really fun after work.
Totally, that makes sense.
But I think part of the way that I kind of try to persist through that work is you have to naturally detach yourself a little bit and view it as I'm doing research on something, a topic. And as upsetting or traumatizing as that may be, that is contained to my work day. So as much as I can, I try not to talk too much about it or engage in it after I log off, because that's so much of what I look at. And it's, I mean, sometimes it's more difficult because obviously, naturally, people want to talk about it. People want to talk about what's happening, what's literally happened in the last week that seems like it's been a year. So it's kind of just being really mindful about when you engage and how you engage, especially because you're working with usually a lot more information than the average person has. And explaining that can be honestly kind of exhausting sometimes. So yeah, you definitely have to, I mean, I work remotely, so maybe like you kind of just have to like get up and go outside and like literally touch grass basically.
Yeah, totally. There's more to life than this, I swear.
Yes.
Oh, also going back to what you were saying earlier about the continuing education, I'm just going to plug that real quick, which is that every other month, Sister Song does a continuing education series. And so we do a deep dive lesson on different topics that have to do with reproductive justice. So we've done one on birth justice. We did one on talking about the South and the history of Southern movement building, which is the one that Negar was talking about. We did one on queering reproductive justice, like all kinds of different random topics that have to do with reproductive justice. We talk about them. And sometimes we bring in other guest speakers who are going to come in and share their wisdom with us. And those are every other month. So if you want to get involved with that, you can either become a Sister Song member, go to sistersong.net, or you can join our email list, which is also on the website. So yeah, you should do that.
Yes, highly recommend. But I think another thing too, just thinking about like how to move forward when so much of this information is like I have to consume, is that the work that the reproductive justice movement is doing really benefits real, like, tangible goals and people.
Yeah.
Like, you can really see, literally sometimes, how somebody might learn something and that empowers them to make a decision about their own health care or their child or somebody else that they know in their family, to seek out something that they might need or advocate for themselves better in a medical setting. Because I think, many of us know that the way that Black and brown people and marginalized people are treated in medical settings is not the same, unfortunately. So just advocating for yourself and kind of knowing what your rights are, being able to provide that as resources to people is really rewarding. And one of the things that we have actually is an anti-abortion pregnancy center database. So it's so predatory how these anti-abortion pregnancy centers will try to get people, like women, to come into their centers because they quote unquote provide this like holistic care.
Is this the same as a crisis pregnancy center?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. And they basically try to brainwash, honestly, a little bit women and anybody who kind of fits into their mold of who should be coming in or supporting their work. And so having that as a resource, I think, or just telling people, like, here are the things that you should avoid and here are the actors that you should watch out for. Because, like, sometimes it can be really hard to tell what is a anti-abortion pregnancy center and what's an actual abortion clinic, because they'll set up shop across the street, or they'll try to use names and language that make them seem really empowering.
Yeah.
I mean,
almost interned at one.
The other day I was waiting for the bus, and I'm in New York, and there was one that I think it was named something like Women's Wholeness or something.
Yeah.
And I was like, wow, here? Really? Like, right here. But that's how they operate. You know, they want you to think that they're here for you.
Right.
And will provide more assistance, even financially, than an abortion clinic or a real women's health clinic can.
Yeah, I remember when I was young, there was one near our house, and it was called like something like Empowering Women Inc. or some shit. Yeah. And I was like, that sounds awesome. Like, I want to help pregnant people. I want to like support people. And then you go in and you're like, there's something fishy about this. I don't think you guys are doctors.
Not right.
Something is not right. And I think a really crazy part about crisis pregnancy centers that has really stuck with me is that many of them are state funded.
Yep.
Like, not all states, but a lot of states are putting funding, noting that they are not funding actual abortion clinics or places where people can actually get care.
Yeah. It's definitely kind of just something that people outside of the movement think is way less prevalent than it actually is. Like, I think when I talk to people outside of the repro justice space and say things like, anti-abortion pregnancy centers get government funding, they're like, what the fuck?
Yeah, it's crazy.
Like, how? You know, and I'm like, well, it's just, they're strategic. That's how it is. It's not just like face-to-face value. It's all of the things that they try to advocate for and, you know, be these amazing, great stewards of pregnancy care. And
because a lot of them will provide like free free ultrasounds, like things like that,
free diapers.
So it is there. You have to be the level of critical thinking you have to be able to have, and the level of like knowledge about what's going on that you have to have in order to acknowledge them as something bad is really hard. Like, because there are some things there that are like, if you need diapers, fine, that makes sense that you would end up there. But then there's these heinous things about them. Like, I remember hearing about crisis pregnancy centers that would have you come in and they wouldn't say that they're anti-abortion, but then they would be like, oh, come back in 2 weeks for your appointment, and they'd push it back far enough that all of a sudden it's illegal for you to have an abortion.
Yeah.
Like, that is sinister.
Yeah. And everything that they do is calculated. Like, it's not just by chance that these things happen. Like, that's a strategy that they use and they've been told to use. It's not just like, like one person who works at a clinic being like, I'm going to make this person wait a few weeks, you know? But yeah, just going back to like how that kind of raising awareness about that, being able to do that through our work is rewarding, and trying to use the resources that we do have, like the database that I was talking about, that can be used in like actual research. And that's, been the case. It's really cool that database has been used for people at universities who are doing reports on anti-abortion pregnancy centers, and just the way that they operate in relation to the government and also their populations, like where they are. Because I think, you know, as many might assume, they're much more prevalent in rural areas, that there aren't other options for people to seek out. And with the price of so many baby products like diapers, formula, like sometimes that can be the only place that a person thinks they can get that. So to them, you know, that's the only resource, and they definitely capitalize off of that notion for sure.
I feel like the main takeaway that I'm getting from everything you're saying is just that there are so many entry points to be able to end up in conservative politics. Like, there are just so many opportunities, especially like anti-abortion and white supremacy is what we're here to talk about. Like, there are so many touch points that you can end up in that ideology without necessarily going into it and being like, I hate abortion and also I'm white supremacist. Like, there are so many other entry points where, like, maybe you aren't actively saying that you're white supremacist, but the ways that you are operating and the ways that you are voting and the ways that you are ideologically presenting yourself because of one thing or another that might be small but is big in your life.
I mean, we talk all the time about single issue voters and what that means, and sometimes it's not even about like your values that you want to uphold, it's you trying to survive.
Totally.
And any type of struggle in that way or marginalization is kind of like bait for them. Like they'll jump on that tactic and then kind of run with it. And a lot of, I think, people who are in areas that aren't as exposed to resources about reproductive justice, like more rural areas or just places where there's a lot of gerrymandering, like just conservatives have control over like local politics, and that's what they're seeing in the news and their newspapers. So breaking out of that mindset is difficult, I think, and it's not as simple as it might seem to people like us who are like, well, obviously that's fucked up. Why would anybody believe that, you know? But yeah, it's prevalent, and I think a lot of the ways that right now we're seeing, unfortunately, the way that abortion is being even criminalized. Like, these are ways white supremacy weaves itself into their movement, like surveillance, you know, requiring abortion clinics to report their data and then using that in a way to criminalize people who have had abortions or who provide abortions. Like, there are so many different ways that they try to kind of excavate anything that could be viewed as exploitative to the fetuses, you know?
Yeah, what you're saying about criminalization and that connection to white supremacy makes a lot of sense, because I feel like it's very clear that the prison system is rooted in some serious racism and disproportionate populations of Black and brown communities, specifically Black communities, are incarcerated, and it has nothing to do with crime rates. And so, like, looking at or like what kind of crimes it is also has an impact on it. But just looking at the ways that we can make that understanding that criminalization is racist, and then being able to make that connection that when abortion bans are then created to criminalize people, it is inherently connected to white supremacy. Yeah,
absolutely. And I think it's sometimes difficult for people who aren't involved in the movement to understand that an abortion ban, that's the aim. You know, it's not just for it to not happen. They want to punish and prosecute people who violate that. And it can be really sinister, or I think more and more now, unfortunately, it's like they're not afraid to be fucking straight up about it. They'll literally say, like, you will be in prison if you violate this law. You will pay however many thousands of dollars in fees if you violate this law. And people die. Like, people will die because of that. We've seen in the last few years multiple women die because of either fear of seeking care or a provider not being able to discern whether or not they're able to even give care. So the anti-abortion movement will claim, like, nobody's dying. It's because they made this choice that they wanted to take an abortion pill, or they went to this clinic that tricked them. Like, that nobody's dying, but they are. And it's, I mean, so just like devastating to see, because that is, in our minds, I guess, so solvable.
Yeah. And the women that I'm sure there are more, but the women that I am thinking of as the ones who we acknowledge are the ones who have passed directly because of abortion bans are Black women.
Yep. Yeah. Yeah. It is not a coincidence. And in the way that anti-abortion personalities and organizations have responded specifically to those instances, like Amber Nicole Thurman or Candy Miller, it is so demonizing. Like, no matter what the details are or what the facts are, the narrative is always, oh, well, you know, she didn't know any better, and she, like, didn't have the intelligence to discern that she shouldn't do this, or, you know, she was preyed upon by abortion advocates. And sometimes they'll even use the narrative that abortion is like the number one cause of death of Black people.
Yeah,
they love that one.
The billboards that went up in 2004, I want to say, that inspired Sister Song's Trust Black Women campaign, said that the most dangerous place for a Black baby is in the mother's womb.
Yeah, because they'll capitalize off of, again, liberation framework and rhetoric that, to people who aren't going to do any further research or have any further information, seems legit. Like, they just are like, oh, cool, yeah, that sounds good. I guess that sounds bad. I'm not going to support it.
Right.
You know?
And it feels so telling that, like, if you have to utilize liberation movement rhetoric in order to get people to be part of your movement, it sounds like liberation movement rhetoric is working, like it's effective, people care about it. It's just, how do we actually channel that into what is effective policy rather than actively voting against your own interests?
Yeah, I think just thinking again about like how they use rhetoric around slavery specifically, and the language that they employ, and the history that they try to exploit in a way of being like, this was once viewed as normal and now it's condemned. Like, that's how abortion is going to be. Whose side are you going to be on? Are you going to be on the right side that condemned killing babies, or are you going to advocate for death? And like these really extreme narratives that try to scare people into thinking that in the future, this viewpoint is going to be very controversial. And honestly, it's controversial now.
Right.
But in a way that's like, you know, they thought that this was totally fine, and now look, like, you know, so.
Which is like words that have come out of my mouth too on different times. You know what I mean? Like I've said the words like, oh, do you want to be on the right side of history? Like, look at these things that we used to think were okay. And like, these are moments where we need to be on the right side of history. Like, it's same, but so different. Like,
yeah. I mean, the way that it's so prevalent, like seeing this language in articles, that honestly I'm like, oh my god, again, another one. Like, of course you think that slavery and abortion are the same thing, or of course you think that fetuses need to employ framework of the civil rights movement, like human rights, and they're a human even if they're a clump of cells or whatever, you know. Like, they love latching onto those narratives too. Like, abortion advocates, they love thinking that it's a clump of cells, but like, this is an embryo and that turns into life at one point, and like, there's no saying that a living being is not sentient, and like, all of the stuff that they think is backed up by real facts and science, and it's just not.
Right, it's just not. Yeah,
I think when I look at sources, I always try to see who the author of a study is, because sometimes they're published in actual medical journals, which is fucking unfortunate, but you can tell, because often the argument that somebody is making is based on an anti-abortion researcher or like doctors' quote-unquote research. And whenever I see that, I'm like, are they actually using a study, or is this just like their friend wrote this and they're like, cool, let me just blast that out to the internet and anybody else who's willing to listen.
Totally. If my homies wrote something.
It's literally my homies wrote something. And just thinking about how the kind of like shame mindset of, are you going to be the way that pro-slavery people were going to be, you know, by being pro-abortion, is like, girl, you didn't care about that. Like, you don't care about that. You literally just want to use people as pawns.
Right, because then why wouldn't your movement be like the ways that people are exploited into labor in the prison system? Like, there's so many connections that can be made, but this doesn't feel like this was, you stretched. You stretched hard for that one.
You're reaching, baby.
You're reaching, and it's working.
Yeah, that's the most fucked up thing, is it's working.
What is this? I mean, because there are people who, especially, like, I don't know, my association is religious people. Like, there are people who genuinely are like, abortion is murder.
Yeah.
But, like, but then you're also talking about people who abortion is more of a political tactic than anything, and a politically relevant talking point to fit into their larger goals, which are around control, population control, all of that.
Yeah.
How do those two in categories of people interact with one another? Are they connected? Are they one and the same in some ways?
I think they're right now kind of merging a little bit, at least, because there are kind of on both sides of the same coin, like, anti-abortion activists who have either been extremely, like, very extreme in their views, and then others who are just joining the movement, or they're trying to appeal to a sense of, I guess, conservatism. Like, I mean, literally 2 days ago, RFK Jr. abortion hearing, like, people were grilling him about, well, you've been pro-abortion in the past. And he's like, oh, well, no, I can't really, but it's not anymore. So it's kind of just trying to adapt to whatever will get you into that position of power. And then it's like a free-for-all, basically.
Right. I always think about just, like, these conservative politicians will pay for their mistresses' abortions. Like, that just comes up for me all the time. Like, it's not about abortion. It's not about... It's like, it's about who has the right to have an abortion. And, like, so many people, I don't know. And it's also a question of, like, it's always a mistake when it's you. Someone said to me there's three exceptions to abortion rules, and it's rape, incest, and me. And I was like, yeah, that actually has come up for me in abortion doula work, where it's like people will come in and be like, just so you know, I'm not pro-abortion, like, I'm super anti-abortion, but, like, I did everything I could and we used a condom, and, like, I'm married, just so you know, I have kids, it's just, like, kind of hard time right now. And I'm like, I totally. It's a hard time for a lot of people.
Yeah, we're going through it, babe.
Right, it's not just you. I promise it's not just you.
Yeah, I think that sense of shame is really insidious.
Yeah.
And it will creep into people's consciousness and just overtake however they interact with people, and not allow them to kind of be honest with themselves about circumstances and kind of how they're going to continue after they have this experience or decision. I mean, there are literally, from anti-abortion pregnancy centers, there are literally foundations and retreats for abortion survivors. Like people who have had abortions and need to heal from them. And they capitalize off of every possible outcome. Like, you had an abortion? Okay, we don't agree with that, but let's help you heal from it. You know? Like, it's, in a way, just doesn't discriminate against an outcome. It's just like, okay, well, hop on the bandwagon anyway. We'll indoctrinate you.
It's very hate the sin, not the sinner vibes. Like, yeah. And, like, you know, briefly, my cause in high school was anti-circumcision. That was like very much my. I don't know what I read, but I think I read that like 300 bababies a year die from circumcision. Like,
oh my god, I didn't know that.
Yeah, I don't know if that's true. Do not quote me on that. I think I read that. Like, that is a statistic that has stuck with me since I was like 15, and I was like, no, the babies are dying from circumcision. And I was so concerned about this, and I like literally thought, I looked it up, and there was like healing spaces for people who had gone through like the trauma of a circumcision and then like felt violated by it in adulthood. And like, I was very concerned about this topic. Like, I don't know why I was bringing this up.
It's fear-mongering.
It's fear-mongering.
Honestly. Like, it really, if you say something the right way, it will always get someone.
Yeah, I guess that's my point, exactly. Where it's like, if you say it the right way, hit me with the right statistic at the right time, like, all of a sudden that's my cause. And like, don't get me wrong, I'm not super pro-circumcision, but like, it's not my cause. Like, it's not the hill I'm gonna die on.
Yeah. I think exactly what you were saying, though. Like, at the right time, with the right statistic, like, anything can seem like the issue.
Yeah.
And that statistic could literally be made up.
Totally.
Like, whether it's based on one of their, like, fake studies, or sometimes they try to use actual studies and basically just manipulate the information to seem like it's proving their point. Right. When in reality, you go and look and you're like, that's not what they were saying. Yeah. Or the study is literally from 25 years ago.
Yeah, I think it's so easy to feel like we're immune from it, like that, like it would never happen to us. But in reality, like everybody can be vulnerable to false rhetoric depending on the time and place of when they hear it. Yeah. And like once you're in, it can be hard to get out. Like we are living in a giant cult mentality right now around the conservative movement, and like it is hard to get out of. But yeah, like that could happen to a lot. Some are way more susceptible. Like there are identities that make you wildly more susceptible. Yeah. But like I briefly thought that Wayfair was actually human trafficking children. You know, like because
I honestly did too.
I totally thought that. Like, and then I heard the debunking, and I was like, I'm an idiot. Yeah. You know, and like, but like for that 3-day period, like I was very concerned. And
conspiracy is effective.
It's effective, and conspiracy is exactly what's happening here, right?
Yeah. It's very much part of their strategy and kind of using things that maybe people might not even agree with, or maybe they know that it's not true, but they don't know how to refute or respond. Like they don't have the tools to say, hey, that's untrue and here's why. Because it's intimidating. You know, they band together and they really make it seem like they have the facts. So when you're reading something that's like abortion is slavery, you're like, how the fuck do I respond to that? Right. You know, where do I even start?
Yeah.
So
why do you see it as important to be able to articulate that white supremacy and anti-choice are two sides of the same coin in some ways?
Yeah. I mean, I think it was just like what we were just talking about of like knowing how to respond at the specific time, or knowing how to be critical when faced with information. It's so hard, I think, nowadays just to know what's real and what's not on the internet. Like there's so many deep fakes and there's so many AI, like it's just, you see something and you're like, is that real, or am I just reading something that like some troll on Twitter wrote? So having the right information, I think, and that comes from trusted partners. So like, you know, Sister Song, or I mean, to plug my own,
please do,
or your Repro Action, like the clinic database, like those are things that can be used as facts to back up real arguments, and not kind of like these phony violence, fear-mongering rhetoric. And I think that's can be one of the most effective tactics, is like just hit them with the information. Yeah. Like, we don't need to talk about your character. We don't need to talk about your views in different areas of social life. Like, here's the facts. Are you going to argue with that? Go ahead. You know?
Totally.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think people don't know how to talk to one another across the political divide, which makes sense. Like, there's a lot of harm that it has been done to people during that conversation. Like, I know that I avoid it like the plague. Like, there's a lot of fairness there. And also, like, when you can acknowledge that so many of these people are not actually, like, there are evil masterminds behind this, and also like there's a lot of people who are buying into something because they're desperate, and because they're scared, and because they need to put food on the table, and like that's where we start, you know, like those are the people who like have the opportunity to come another direction, and to, if they feel like they're being taken care of by somebody else, which like is not something that we have given them yet. And so I think that's something that the left really does need to think about, is like, how do we invite in, I mean, I think a lot about poor white voters, and I don't think that that's necessarily our demographic, but, like, I do think there's something to be said about, like, voting against your own interests. Poor white people are really good at that.
Yeah.
They're really good at working against their own interests.
Yeah, I mean, I think when you have, the less resources you have, the more you have to cling to concrete, like, resources. Like, if we're talking about, like, poor white voters, it's difficult to look at a candidate's entire platform and be like, I agree with this, but not that. So whatever, I'm not going to vote for them. Like, is this going to benefit me financially and help me survive? And sometimes it's as simple as that. Like, that's it. You know, they're not thinking about the other things. Or I think more and more too, conservatives are just being straight up about, we'll offer you this, and there's no even, like, decorum about it. They're just like, here you go, and the Democrats are not going to give you that. They're just obsessed with abortion and
trans kids and all that.
Like mutilating children.
Yeah, I guess that's probably how they would frame that.
Oh, it is. They literally every day will be like, oh, you know, gender affirming surgery, although that's not what they call it. They just call it mutilating children.
Wow. Dude, your job's wild. Your job's really wild. Like, just spending all day deep in the trenches.
It's in the trenches.
Yeah.
I'm in the trenches. But I think, again, like, one way that I try to kind of think about it is, like, every day I'm like, okay, try not to laugh challenge.
Yeah, totally.
And every day I fail because I'm like, this is so laughable, and you kind of just have to laugh so you can get back to it and be like, okay, here's the actual information I can glean from this heinous tweet and turn it into a resource for people who actually need care and information. So
I don't think that any conservatives listen to the show. I wish they did, but I don't think they do. And so what would, like, a main takeaway that you would want the leftist people to get out of this and to know about what the opposition is doing?
Yeah, I mean, I think in the age of so much disinformation and misinformation, especially from politicians, whether or not you agree with their values or platforms, community is just, like, the most important resource you can have. And because it's hard to know who's on your side ideologically and not, like, having communities, whether that's organizations or groups of people that you trust and know will give you accurate information, like, really just cling to that, because that's how you use collective power for transformative justice and narratives and kind of helping people see their own power, because it's really easy right now to feel hopeless and just like you can't do anything, and every day you wake up and it's a new thing and you're like, well, what am I supposed to do? I just, like, want to stay in bed all day. But there's strength in numbers, and I think with community around you, whether, again, like, that's your friends or an organization you volunteer with or that you're a member of, hint hint, or you use their database,
I don't know, something like
that, those are really powerful mainstays and can become super influential in not just your life but the people around you that maybe they're not as involved. You know, they read the news, but they haven't been to, like, a webinar that talks about reproductive justice, or they haven't read the same things that maybe people who have studied this have read. So it is definitely like a reverberation effect. What is that? I'm trying to think of what the word is for that.
I think that's right.
It's like, it, you know, when you, like,
ripple effect?
Yes.
Yeah, totally. You picked a way harder word.
Yeah.
You picked a way harder word.
Yeah, I was an English major, can you tell?
Yeah, totally. You used the word reverberation and it was locked in,
Yeah. But yes, ripple effect, for sure.
Well, this has been really, really helpful. I feel like I've learned a lot about what the right wings are doing, and I don't like it. I'm not a fan of what I learned today.
F on that one.
Yeah.
F in the chat.
Totally. I was going to say, I loved talking to you, but I didn't have fun learning from you. I'll be so honest.
Yeah. I mean, I think that this kind of conversation is important, though, because if you're just hitting people with really upsetting facts and not, not making, like, it to be such a light thing that doesn't matter, but making it accessible in that way, like, oh, okay, like, I can understand this, and now can look for ways to respond if I'm faced with those situations or with those people. Like, you don't need to have a degree in gender studies to be able to respond or be able to give people actual information around you that may not even agree ideologically with you on everything. It's like the classic Thanksgiving table with your bigoted relatives or whatever. But there are so many, you were talking about earlier, entry points. Like, the antis make it seem like there are so many entry points. And in reality, that's true because they'll just take anybody. But we also have the same power. Like, there are so many ways that people can enter and access a movement. And it's not just through books and things like that. And the community aspect of liberation, I think, is honestly the most powerful. So
I love that. I think that's very true. I think that is our strength, is being able to build community.
Yeah. And it's like, no matter how the day goes, like, we won today or we didn't win today, we're together.
Yeah.
It's not, you're not alone. We are in this work together. So I feel like I sound like a candidate.
No, that was so nice. That was so nice. Yeah, you ended on a beautiful, and that's why you should vote Negar for, I don't know, state senate.
Never in my life.
Well, thank you so much for being here and for sharing your wisdom with us. I really appreciate it. This was great.
Yeah, and if I can plug another
Please.
thing, I'm actually working on a blog series right now about rhetoric appropriation and anti-abortion movements, like what we were talking about, slavery, civil rights movement. So check that out when it comes out. And yeah, it's been really awesome to talk with you.